Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an edition of a program from WPBS, which we think is going to be most exciting and, frankly, an interesting discussion coming up. We just watched Andrew Coulson's discovery about education. There were some interesting points made in that presentation. I have a feeling that we may not find general agreement to all of those points. So we're going to introduce first our panel to you tonight. On my far left, Sister Rose Allen Coughlin, Superintendent of Schools in the Diocese of Ogdensburg. Next to her, Lisa Parsons, Assistant High School Principal at South Jefferson Central High School. And next to me, Steve Todd, who is District Superintendent of Jeff Lewis Hamilton Herkimer Oneida Board of Cooperative Educational Services. A long title, Steve. The program was fascinating, and I think all of us who have ever been involved in education in one form or another were stimulated by what was presented. Maybe not in total agreement, but stimulated. So let me start the first question by saying, do you agree with Mr. Coulson's conclusion that formal education as we know it is falling behind in some of the innovative practices found in other of our economic sectors? Do you agree with that position? And Sister, I'm going to start at the far end with you, and if I get that look, I know I'm in trouble once again this evening. Sister.
Falling behind in terms of the innovative approach, I think that's the question that you're asking. I don't agree with the notion that education today has not introduced innovative approaches. I think certainly it has. I think the innovation, to be successful, however, has to be accompanied by the competency of the teacher, whether that competency is understood as the energy or the ability to engage students and to bring them into the educational process. So I think maybe that was when Mr. Coulson so often talks about the innovation that he would see as missing. I wouldn't agree with that. I think there is an innovation in teaching today, but I think in order for that to be successful, it always depends upon the agent that delivers it, and that's the teacher.
How about you? Did you find agreement with his basic principles or not?
I agree with Sister Ellen Rose. There are innovations going on in education. Any idea is an innovation, and we've had lots of new ideas generated. There's been lots of changes in education, but the changes are only good, the innovation is only as good as those who are implementing them. And our classroom teachers, the people in the school, the people that are making the changes and really giving students what they need.
From your perspective, Steve, do you see this innovation going on or not?
I agree completely with Sister Ellen Rose and with Lisa that though Mr. Coulson, I think, is correct that innovation is critical in education, I disagree with his premise that it isn't happening in education. We see it in our public schools, we see it in our parochial schools. I get into a good many classrooms. I would invite anyone who'd like to see the interesting and inspiring work that our teachers are doing in all of our public and parochial schools to get into classrooms and see it firsthand. We see a good deal of innovation in the commitment to learner-centered education. I think that is the great innovation, in my view, of our age. The realization that it's not about the toys and the gadgets. Certainly there are tools. If we focus too much on the technology side of things, I think we miss the boat. It's about building relationships with students. It's about finding ways to celebrate the diversity of student interests, talents, and needs, and finding ways to inspire students, each and every student, to be sort of the captain of their own ship with regard to education, to be the driver, not the passive recipient, but the active participant, what some call constructivism in education. Others would call learner-centered education. I see a great deal of that going on, and I see teachers teaching teachers. So I would challenge Mr. Coulson's major premise that education has been stagnant in this regard. I think it's dynamic.
Mr. Coulson, I think, was trying to stimulate a discussion about education amongst everyone who participates, and that would include parents. Do you agree that getting this right is absolutely critical as a society. Sister, would you comment on that?
Getting education right.
Yeah.
Yes, if your concept of education includes the development and formation of the whole person, it's critical that we get it right. But the we, in order for that to happen, is not only the teaching staff. The we has to include the parent. The we has to include the student. The we has to include all of those people that we depend upon in the educational system. So I would agree that it's critical, but the we has to be understood in a broad context. I think one of the interesting things that Mr. Colson does is I'm not sure, at least from my perspective, that he ever defined education, but I think he named very important components to education that any educational system needs in order to be successful. The student, the parent, the community, parent expectation, student expectation and motivation, competition, funding. I think all of those are dynamic elements of education. And so when we're talking about providing an education, an integral education that is going to allow our students to be the very best that they can be, all of those components somehow have to be included, regardless of what system, whether it's a public system, whether it's a charter school, whether it's a private system, if it's an online presentation. I suppose even in homeschooling, those elements need to be there.
Well, the necessary follow-on question to that comment, which is, in the very simple way, it needs a collegiate effort on the part of all of us. Is that happening, Lisa? I mean, are you seeing this coming together to embrace change, to try to encourage the best educational system the United States can produce, and more importantly, our local communities?
I think there's a great deal of collaboration that goes on in the public schools, between the public and the parochial schools, and I think that's key, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. You would be right in the middle of that, as you know, representing a number of different schools. Do you agree? Is this collegial effort coming together to try to improve education?
I do believe it is, and I look at this not only in my role as an educator, but as a dad. I have a 4-year-old daughter who attends one of the wonderful Catholic schools here in a pre-K program at St. John Bosco in the Immaculate Heart system. Next year she'll attend as a kindergartner Sherman Elementary School in the public system. We have 2 very wonderful systems that dovetail beautifully. And what I see is educators who are all committed to the whole child. And that's really what it's all about. I think, Lisa, you said it a while ago. We have to define success a bit more broadly than I think Mr. Colson did. And again, I say with respect for what he's trying to do in the dialogue that he's trying to stimulate, but I think if I didn't make the case that success needs to be defined more broadly, I think I'd be remiss. That if we're not looking at something more than test scores and percentage of kids going on to college, I think we're missing the boat here. Mm-hmm. Those are 2 ways to measure success, right. But not every student's success is captured by that. A great many students are tremendously successful in education today by going through career and technical education programs that allow them to be very successful in various career fields. Many students are finding great success going on and serving our nation in the military out of school. If we define success as some of his examples seem to imply, by everybody going to college, or by the percentage of kids who are passing tests, I think we miss the whole child commitment. And I do see a tremendous collaboration, not only between our public and parochial schools here in the North Country, but between all of the community agencies. It takes a village to raise a child, and getting it right means not just looking at that narrow definition of success, but looking at a broader definition. How can every student shine and be healthy and happy and a good citizen?
Well, you three have devoted your entire lives to educating young people. How would you address the argument that Mr. Colson raised, where he talked about flatline results in the early 70s to today, that we are spending considerably more money in education, and yet the end results do not seem to produce a corresponding improvement? How would you, is that correct, first of all? And secondly, how would you explain that? Is that something we need to, as a society, begin to take apart and find out why? Sister, do you want to take a shot at that one? I'm getting the look again, so I'm a little nervous
No, I
about
will.
asking. But
Well, it goes back, I think, to the comments we were making a few moments ago about the different elements that need to be part of the educational process. So if indeed you look at flatline results, if that's the reality, well then you can't look at that as blaming the fact that, well, there was no innovation, the teacher wasn't competent, the student wasn't motivated, parents weren't included, the community wasn't providing the support. You need to look at all those elements and see how they're coming together. And if they're not, then that's the place where our efforts need to be placed. Mm-hmm. And I think you'd see student achievement improve if all of those pieces were operative to their maximum. And in any educational system, they're most likely not all operative at the maximum level. Right. So if we want to talk about test results, we can't just look at that test result and say, well, this is the component that was missing. The innovation was missing. Mm-hmm. Not so, from what we said earlier. Not so. Well, are there other pieces that we're missing? Mm-hmm. And there are 6 or 7 other pieces that we would need to look at. See, the parents are absolutely crucial in the education of their children. Absolutely crucial. Sure. They board the children. They are the ones ultimately responsible for directing their education. Their involvement and wholehearted interest in what is happening is simply essential to a strong academic program.
One of the results, which is a kind of a continuum of that question, that we see is a comparison of the educational system in the U.S. with those in other parts of the world. And in some areas, particularly in math, science, and some of those areas, the United States is seeming to fall behind. We're in the middle of the pack in many results. And again, given the amount of money that society is spending to ensure good results, we are not as successful as other nations who are spending less per child than we are. Is that a danger signal? Does that suggest something is not right with what is going on and we need to get to the bottom of that? How do you view that, Steve?
I'd love to jump in on that. I would challenge anyone who is measuring success to consider what measures they're looking at, and to look at multiple measures, because I think one of the great innovations of our age, again, in embracing the whole child and embracing the beauty of each individual's way to success, and saying not everybody has to go the same route and be a square peg in a round hole. If we look at one narrow measure and use that as the metric for success or failure for comparison across all nations and across all states, I think we miss the boat. And that if we are not looking at multiple measures of success, then I think we're missing something there. Many of the studies which indicate that American students are perhaps not achieving at the same level as students in, say, we saw it in the examples in Mr. Colson's video, South Korea and Sweden. We see Finland. We see our neighbors to the north in Canada. In Ontario, they're really doing remarkable work in education. So I think we need to sort of look at what are the metrics that we're looking at. Are we looking at just straight test scores in math and English? Are we looking also at 21st century skills, where I think many American schools are making incredible innovations and progress. teaching students and engaging students in collaborative learning exercises so that their learning experiences mirror the job experiences in the world. So some of those things are hard to put a finger on and measure and compare and contrast. So I guess I would ask people to be cautious as they look at a bar graph and draw the conclusion that we're falling behind. I think there's a good deal of good news in American education. And I think if we're studying, a great place to study would be right across the border in Canada. And some North Country educators I traveled with 3 years ago to visit schools in the Ottawa-Carleton School District in Ontario, and took away a number of great ideas. And I know that some educators from there came to the North Country to learn some things that we're doing in technology. We can learn from one another. And so I would just caution people, look at multiple metrics, not just some simple individual metric.
I think if I can just add to that, one of the things that you would consider and look at is the heterogeneous population within our schools. And I think, Sister Ellen Rose, you talk about a pluralistic population. We address all of the children, a diverse population that comes to us. And I think that speaks volumes for the American schools.
Well, Lisa, that brings an interesting question that I think Mr. Colson was trying to suggest. So let's see what you think about the suggestion. He seemed to suggest that charter schools or privately funded schools, either through tax credit programs or some other device, achieved better results than some of the public, if not all of the public schools that are in our country. Is that how accurate do you see that contention? Anybody comment on that?
May I?
Yes, of course, sure.
I believe, like public schools, some are stronger than others. Charter schools are in the same boat. Some are remarkable. Some have shown results that are not any better than struggling traditional public schools. I think there's a diversity within the charter school world, just like there is within the public school world. So I think to make the case that charter schools are outperforming public schools is not, at least from what I've seen, accurate.
Do you both agree with that premise?
We live in a pluralistic society. One size doesn't fit all. And as we said earlier, the parent is primarily the one who has a responsibility to direct their child's education. There's the public school, there's the private school, there's the opportunity for some to homeschool, there's online, there's charter schools. And I think in any one of those groups, a parent has a responsibility to look at that program. They'll find some very high-ended, wonderful programs. They'll find some that aren't as good as the others. And I think that's what you were saying.
I would
too,
agree,
Steve.
and I would say I think perhaps maybe the major reason we don't have charter schools here in our part of the world is because people are pretty happy with the choices they have.
I know most of these individuals quite well and have known them for a long time. So what I'm about to say is I think I can draw the conclusion without too much trouble. You are not only thinking about present day in education, but you are also thinking about where education is headed and how that educational system that we call pluralistic or whatever we decide to call it is in this day and age. What is it going to be in 5 or 10 years? Do you forecast changes of some major impact? Steve, you want to take a shot at that one first?
I would piggyback on some of the examples I gave earlier. I think that educational success in the future is going to depend upon us continuing to focus upon learner-centered educational strategies rather than the teacher being the sage on the stage, the guide on the side, helping students as individuals and as groups of students to, in the classroom, replicate the kinds of problem-solving situations and techniques that they will face in the world outside of school. We see more and more of that in career and technical education, but also in traditional classroom settings. And problem-based or project-based instruction really is going to be, I think, front and center in all curricular areas. And so I think the degree to which we are able to continue to expand that emphasis moving forward and focus upon the fact that each student can find and celebrate success in a different way and not narrowly define success and look at multiple measures of success, those will be the trends that will define our success moving forward, in my opinion.
Looking at the future?
I just want to add a point. I think particularly with the opportunity to gain so much information via the internet, I think, and this current generation's interest in being connected that way, whether it's through their phone, whether it's through their tablet, through the computer, whatever. I think as we move forward, we have to be sure that we are modeling and teaching interpersonal skills.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really crucial, and I think Steve was perhaps saying the same thing when he, or at least alluding to it when he used the word collaboration.
Yes.
But digital citizenship is extremely important, but that our students interact personally with one another, you know,
Yeah.
and learn the skills of civility, and learn that really it's not all about me. It has something to do with the fact that a lot to do with the fact that I belong to a community, you know, and that I have responsibilities toward that community, whether it be my family, whether it be my village, my city, my state, the world, and that's. I think that's one of our biggest challenges.
More than reading, writing, and arithmetic, as they use.
Well, we can't dismiss those. That's for sure. You know,
Respect, responsibility.
we
Yes.
assume they're there, but
Extra
that
hires.
Yes.
interpersonal piece is just so important, because I think there's a tendency to be somewhat isolated in terms of my device and what I'm gathering from it or garnering from it.
I agree.
I'm going to press a little bit on the future, and let me use a fact I heard recently to see if we can address this.
Okay.
I'm told that within 20 years, 40% of every single job description in northern New York will have changed. Which means, in my head anyway, that jobs that we are accustomed to viewing today will change dramatically in the years ahead. Mm-hmm. So education cannot be static, in my opinion. Maybe that's the bad word, but how do we as educators prepare young people for what is going on now, which is this tremendous acceleration of change in how they produce products, earn a living, support their families, all of that? How do we get there?
I think adding on to what Sister Ellen Rose said, as well as being in the civility and the character piece, we want to teach them to be critical thinkers. Mm-hmm. We want to teach them to be creative thinkers. We want to teach them to be communicators. We want them to be solution-focused students. And so it doesn't matter what you throw at me. I begin to think of, how can I use this? Where can I use this? Right. What can I do with this? So I think when we teach students those skills, they'll be ready for whatever comes along in 40 years.
The other aspect of this, and another follow-up, if you will, is that when I was a young man, that was 320 years ago, every focus in education was made on making sure that I ended up in college. I believe. I mean, I think in kindergarten they started saying, if you want to be successful, you got to earn a degree. That's not so much anymore. In fact, if anything, that may be even counterproductive to some way. How is education addressing? That's a major change in the line of thinking in terms of how you prepare youngsters for the life they're going to lead. How do you see that?
May I?
Yeah,
I
please.
completely agree, Don, and I think I alluded to it earlier that as we're looking at multiple successes for students, if we define success as what percentage of students went on to college or got into the college of their choice, that's one way to be successful. That was my way to be successful, that was your way to be successful, and that will continue to be one way to be very successful, and we need to continue to prepare kids for that if that is indeed the path that they are going to follow. But we also need to continue to celebrate, and I think I'm encouraged by the increasing recognition of the importance of other types of success, career and technical education. For example, I think here in the North Country, we're a model of career and technical education celebration. Within our Jefferson Lewis BOCES region, we have 1,100 juniors and seniors who spend, that's about 38% of the juniors and seniors, who spend half of their day in one of our 2 technical centers. And I can tell you that more than 90% of those students are placed either in post-secondary education, in a job, or in the military immediately out of high school. Some of those kids who are going right to work are, you'd be blown away by the compensation packages that they're able to land right out of high school. That's one measure of success. And there are almost an infinite number of ways that we should be measuring success, preparing students for the jobs that exist out there. Some of them are going to result in college education, some are not. The student who goes on to serve their country right out of high school in the armed forces is a huge success. And so, I mean, we need to acknowledge and celebrate that, and I'm happy to report, I think I'm seeing a good deal more of that in the public space and within the world of education.
There was a bit of pounding the round peg in the square hole about these things. You know, there were a lot of youngsters who had interests and abilities in one area, but they were pushed and prodded to go to college. And in fact, that may not have been the best choice for them. Are we being selective now when we speak about the career paths that people have to choose from?
I think our schools are doing a phenomenal job with career exploration down in the lower levels, so students start learning about careers and focusing and talking about careers. What is out there? What can I become? And so they're making better decisions. They've got more information to make decisions on. The travesty is the number of students who go to college and take 5 or 6 years to complete a college degree and still aren't sure what they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Or take, with all due respect, so much liberal education courses that they're really unprepared for almost anything other than teaching, and forgive me for putting that. But I ran into a young man who became a diesel mechanic, and he grew up on a farm and he loved equipment. He loved working with his hands. He enjoyed getting fuel and oil and so on his hands. That was the thing he wanted to do. He went through one of the BOCES programs. He got educated in this way, and he just recently announced to me what he is making annually at his job. He is so happy. You know, he's doing what he wants. He's doing what he really feels comfortable in doing. He makes a very good living for his family, and he supplies a need because we can't find enough of those individuals with that type of training. I think that issue is going to be exacerbated as we look ahead in an attempt to attract companies to a workforce that's qualified to take the jobs they can offer. And so I hope education is constantly looking at how that future is going to be. Wayne Gretzky used to say that you win by skating to where the puck is going to be. And so I'm thinking maybe we ought to think about that in terms of education.
May I offer an example? I'm sorry,
Please.
Sister, I should please.
I was going to say, it's a bit of a paradigm shift, isn't it? Because for
It is.
you, for me, you said for yourself, Steve, college was the goal.
Right.
And it was the goal for everybody that was in my graduating class.
Sure.
Even though everyone may not have gone on to college, it was a goal, or supposed to be, because that was what defined that you graduated with distinction because you were going to college. But I think the paradigm shift that we should work toward is the fact that every student is different, and we need to recognize that. They're different in the sense that they have unique gifts and talents, and actually they'll be most successful if they tap into those gifts and talents and develop them. And we have to help them. We have to help them recognize that. So again, one size doesn't fit all. If some go to college, that's fine. If some don't, that's fine. But they need to be challenged and accompanied as they try to figure out and recognize these gifts and talents that they have.
I would agree. May I offer an example, Don, that I
Certainly.
think it speaks to that? So we educators don't have all the answers. We're not going to be able to do this alone. This is a community effort. It takes a village. And here in the North Country, there's a wonderful, innovative program that's been done in partnership between WPBS, this station, and local schools, and industry partners, and the Northern New York Community Foundation, and numerous other partners. And it's called My GPS for Success. And I think you've seen it done. It's a powerful tool, and it's a great example of an innovation. It happens to be using technology, but it's not about the technology. It's about providing students and adults with information in a variety of media about 16 career clusters and the jobs that really exist. So when you speak to the idea of workforce development and how we need to evolve as educators, it's not all about us as educators having all the answers. It's about us as educators partnering with all of our community partners. And My GPS for Success is a great example. So if anybody wants to see an example of innovation, check that out.
And here I was hoping that they would have all the answers to all our educational problems tonight. In 30 minutes that we're going to be talking about this. One of the things that Mr. Colson is or did, I think, in his presentation, it was clear he is not an educator. You read his bio, you discover he came out of the chemistry business and so on, but one of the things he is, I suspect, a good observer of these things. He made it his mission in life to try to bring change to education. How do you see that role? Do we have people who lead the charge for creative activities, someone, the Pied Piper of education, who can rally the troops to change? Do we need that kind of individual? What's your thoughts on that?
I go to Google.
There you go.
No, I do think we, and again, I'm coming back to the collaborative piece. I don't think any one person can do it, but using the strengths, looking at the ideas, who's got an idea, innovative thought, pursuing that. So,
do you come together to talk like that? I mean, as educators from Northern New York, and do you gather in the BOCES conference room and say, okay, let's roll up the sleeves here. Let's see what's good about this thing. Let's see what's bad about this thing. Well, or maybe not bad, but needs improvement. How do we do that? Is that dialogue? Does that dialogue occur? Should it occur?
It is, but I'll tell you one area where we need to do a better job. We need to make sure that we're also including our parochial school partners in that, because we don't always all get together at the same time. And I think you probably have vigorous and valuable conversations within your team, and we have a good number of those regularly scheduled meetings of all stakeholders within the public school world. I think we need to more intentionally have those conversations together, because we have a lot to learn with each other.
I would agree. And going back to Mr. Colson, you see, he may not be an educator, but what he did was prompt a discussion.
Correct.
And I think that's why we need people like that prompt the discussion. Not necessarily that we agree with everything they've said, but that we have an opportunity to visit about it. And we don't feel compelled to accept everything that we heard, but we're free enough to be able to acknowledge the areas that we agree with. So I think an innovator, or Mr. Colson in this case, if they prompt a discussion, that's a good thing.
Well, what would happen, hypothetically, what would happen if we had a room full of stakeholders, 1,000 people, parents, teachers, graduates, people from college, people from charter, people, and they sat down in a room and they watched this program? What do you think would be the end result of that discussion? I assume it would be a discussion. What do you think would happen? Do you want to take a shot at what you think might happen there?
I think one of the first things that might happen is that there would be polarization, and it would be politicized. after
So that's not the forum.
no, no, I don't think so. And you know, as I listened to it, all three segments, and at the end of it, I was determined that the conversation would not be about one system over the other. You know, I was determined that this wasn't going to be public versus private, tax credit versus voucher, charter school versus public. I think it could lend itself to that, but I thought, no, that's not where
It's
I'm
not
going
what
with
we
this.
were trying to
That's not where I want to go with
Yeah.
this. I want to take what I heard and see what's applicable, what I agree with, what I'd like to talk to other people about in the areas that I may not agree. But I think in a large group of 1,000 people, I think it might be hard for some of that to come through, because there are sensitive issues that he raises. I mean, not perhaps in the North Country here, but charter schools are a sensitive issue. And in some sections, perhaps the tension between public and private. We don't experience that in the North Country.
That, Sister, is exactly the reason I asked the question in the way I ask it, which is put 1,000 stakeholders in the room and play this presentation. You will find very different opinions about what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is not so good. So the question then, if Mr. Colson is doing his job right, or any other advocate for better schools, can stakeholders come together and actually achieve an improvement in the system by taking the best of all of those things which are being discussed? Is that possible anymore? Do you see that really seriously taking place?
I do think we have a lot to learn,
Yeah.
all of us, from each other. And at least here in the North Country, we're still committed to civility. I worry about the shrill tones we hear sometimes in other parts of the world and the
agree.
nation. But I do believe that we see it every day here. We partner on a great many things. So I do think it's possible, and I do think it's going to be one of the keys to our success. None of us have all the answers.
Continued research, I think, is, I mean, the amount of research that has come up and that is being used and implemented is amazing, but I think there's a lot more research that needs to go on.
The thing I've learned, or at least I think I've learned, is that most of the people who do the business of education are extremely dedicated. In fact, I would go so far as to say they are very passionate about what they do. And so if they're in a charter school, they're going to be passionate about that concept. If they are funded by tax credit, they're going to be very passionate about supporting that. If they're a private institution, they're going to be passionate about that. If they're a public institution, they're going to try to preserve the public institution. So the question is, can we as a society figure out how to take the best of these worlds and bring it to a community? It may not be able to be applied universally across the United States, but what if a small enclave of good ideas came together, and then that could be replicated throughout the rest of the United States? Is it humanly possible, given New York State regulations, union contracts, insurance concerns, and the practical list of all the things you have to deal with is on and on and on. Can that be considered in the current environment that we face?
I guess one concern I have is Mr. Colson spoke about scaling things up. And education is inherently personal and inherently local. At least here in the United States, people are fiercely committed to their neighborhood schools, to their community schools. And so I think when we try to come up with something that we think can be a one-size-fits-all or a panacea for all, that's where we might get into trouble. That I do think it has to be a locally driven type of process. When we've seen educational reform efforts at the state level and at the national level, where we've tried to generalize in curriculum or assessment or otherwise what's good for all, we've seen considerable pushback because people see education, because it's their kids.
Right.
It's personal. it's local. So I think we need to be mindful and respectful of that natural and healthy inclination and build on that. And the whole, as he continuously talked about scaling things up, I worry about that, because what that might equate to is trying to make a one-size-fits-all application, which does not tend to work out well in education.
Or one system.
Right.
Or one system fits all. You know, I think, again, I go back to that notion that there are many components that comprise a school community, a successful school community. And we're not trying to make one school community, in my view. We're trying to preserve the best of any one of those elements, whether it be public education or private education or charter school education, whatever. I think we're not trying to create one type of school. I think we're trying to provide opportunities for parents to choose what they believe will best meet their child's needs. And that means we have to live with diversity in the system. You know, it's just
part of
needed.
the system.
Yeah.
It's part of who you serve. The thing, you know, when I was on the school board and served for quite a while, I was very jealously guarding the approach to education that we took, and I would defend it to the death. I got my sword out. You know, we have a great school and it's doing the way it should, and you know the kids are great and they're happy and the teachers are wonderful, and I always did that. Was I doing a service to education in general by doing that, or should I have been more thoughtful about when somebody said we could improve the school system a little bit? Should have been a little bit more listening to what they were saying, accepting ideas? What do you think that role is?
I think that's the innovation, the ideas, and being open to that is really what's going to make any educational program better.
Always that keen eye for improvement. But I would say, too, we need cheerleaders. And so don't ever apologize for being a cheerleader for
I'll get my sword back out
again.
again.
Yeah, because I would say, certainly we're all aware that there's a teacher shortage right now. One of the factors, I think, that has helped to cause that, and it's exacerbated some of the other factors that have caused that, is that educators feel a bit beaten up lately in terms of some of the public discourse. And so I would always encourage people to be cheerleaders for the educational model that they love, and actually for the multiple educational models that we have that work well. Just always, don't look at it through rose-colored glasses. Always be looking for innovation and opportunity, but being a cheerleader is a good thing.
Well, I agree. I think we all need cheerleaders now and again, particularly in our local communities where the strength of our educational system is always held up as something to admire. We as a community, in the terms of economic development activities, are always in competition with other communities. And one of the ways that we differentiate this community from others is to say, when I say community, I'm talking about Upper New York State, we educate our kids well. And when they get done with the formal education, they're prepared for life.
Yes.
They have skills which will carry them throughout the remainder of their life. You said it earlier, it's maybe teaching common sense, and maybe that's not the right phrase, but a lot of that has to go into making up a young person, because choices are going to be made by them someday, not by somebody else. They need to have the capacity to understand the critical path thinking that goes into that common sense decision, in my personal opinion.
Along with the empathy and the compassion that Sister Ellen Rose alluded to. I think the whole child, and we hope that every student that graduates from our educational programs has the passion and the purpose of the young man that became the diesel mechanic, because that's a successful
there.
educational program.
You guys are the bosses at what you do? You know, I mean, people report to you, you answer criticisms and all that kind of stuff. Where are we? If we were grading the educational system, I'm going to use the old ABC, forgive me, I don't even know what it is anymore, but are we an A? Are we a B? Are we a C? How good are we doing here? Anybody care to put a report card on the system or on the individual schools, or your appreciation of what we're doing? Steve,
I
A,
would
B,
say,
C, D?
I would say if what we are grading is our commitment to kids and our willingness to explore and innovate and our preparation of students for civil discourse and collaboration and partnership, I would give us an A on that. There are certainly subcategories of that all of us have room for improvement on. I wouldn't grade myself an A on everything. I wouldn't grade every school an A on every subject. But by the same token, I think holistically, we as a North Country educational community, I think are doing a great job. That's my opinion.
I'm going to add to his A, and that the schools here are always seeking to improve and to be better and to build capacity for students. So I think we're looking at ourselves internally and saying, we do this well, what can we do better? Seeking
A, B,
to
or
continually improve.
A, B, C, or D, sister?
Oh, I would agree with what Lisa and Steve said. I think one of our advantages, you know, we're small. I mean,
Does that mean agile?
but I mean, you know, really when I travel from Watertown to Ogdensburg every day, and I go through Hammond and I go through Morristown, and I see the Indian River buses and I see the General Brown buses, and I see the kids walking to school in Ogdensburg. I have colleagues that work in Heuvelton. These, for the most part, you know, in the North Country, these are small, close-knit communities. And the communities are interested in their kids. And they're interested in their kids doing well. Whether that's academically or whether it's in sports. You know, I go by Hammond every day and I see the sign that says the Red Devil driveway because of they were state champs. But there's something to be said for the size of our communities. And I know Watertown's a little different because that's big, but it's still, when you compare with downstate, and they still have their neighborhood schools at the lower levels. And I think that says something about the cohesiveness of our school communities. And it's that cohesiveness that tends to those areas that Steve was talking about. And ranking the schools is, you know, well on their way to being very, very, very fine schools. Yeah.
Tough to get an A, B, C, or D out of them, isn't it? One of the things that us old timers love to do is talk about the good old days. And Mr. Colson started out with the good old days. You saw him standing next to a one-room red schoolhouse. A lot of people say that was the good old days. That was education on a very personal level. How do you respond to that based on what you think you're doing today? Steve, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, I would say we have very good schools that are small. We have very good schools that are medium-sized, very good schools that are big. As long as within each school community we maintain our commitment to community. And like Sister said, even in a very large school system by North Country standards like Watertown, we have community elementary schools, we have teams within the middle school and the intermediate school and the high school to maintain that sense of closeness and community, to have the advantages in many cases of the economies of scale that might allow a larger school district to offer a greater depth and breadth of program to meet the needs of a more diverse student population. Say, not every student has to take the same coursework. We're a large enough entity that we can provide multiple choices. So size does offer those advantages, but there comes a point when you don't want schools to get too large either, because I think we see in some other parts of the state and in the world, schools are so large that it's very hard to maintain that sense of community that really allows us to foster the types of positive developments that we've been talking about here. But we have within this region Inlet Common School, which still is very much like that small one-room schoolhouse. They've got more than one room, but they're small. I mean, we're talking about 20 kids or so at the elementary level. This is a small school. And we have schools as large as Watertown and Indian River and everything in between. And there's excellence at all of them.
I wonder how to phrase this question, but education is so diverse that it poses a number of problems simply because of its diversity. But one of the things that is weighing heavily on the minds of schools these days is the financial arrangements that it has. How do they sustain themselves? And I'm beginning to think we are on the verge of seeing some additional consolidation along the path here. I know there's been a fair amount of that, but more perhaps in the future. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do you agree that we may see more? And we got a couple of minutes to answer that, but.
I was at a school that went through a consolidation. My first year of teaching was the first year Belleville Henderson came together, two separate schools, and it was a tough road to start with, but I think that's a flourishing community, and it was definitely a good move for that school system. And so if it's going to benefit the community and the students, I think we have to come back to the open-mindedness that you talked about as a board member, and consider those options.
Did it, in the case of Belleville Henderson, Lisa, did it offer the opportunity for additional educational opportunities within the system? Is that what made it better?
Yes.
So they maintained.
We would be able to provide more opportunities for the students. Yes.
And they kind of maintained the local flavor characteristics of the two schools when they joined, did they?
Yes.
So in that case, consolidation was probably a
Beneficial.
necessary
Sure.
and good thing.
May I piggyback on that, Don?
Please.
I mean, I would say certainly we'd all have to acknowledge that people, as we talked about earlier, value their community schools. And so consolidation can be a very difficult conversation because it might imperil that local community school feel. But what we are seeing a tremendous growth in, and I think we will continue to see a tremendous growth in, is what we call functional consolidation, where whether districts formally go through a process of legally abolishing themselves and creating larger districts, we see districts coming together to share services and share programs. That's been a growing trend, and it will continue to grow, I think, in the years to come. So you get the benefits of economies of scale without losing the benefits of that local school identity and community.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't take a couple of seconds, and I'm sure you agree with this, to thank WPBS and the gang here for stimulating this discussion, as they do so often about important public issues. It's rare that these issues are explored in the kind of context that we're talking about tonight, and so salute to all the gang here and the folks who are keeping cameras focused and all that stuff. We really appreciate your good work. We've run out of time, and we've only scratched the surface. I had at least 20 more questions which I haven't gotten to, and I would have get the look if I did that, so I know that I want to avoid that. But I certainly want to thank Sister Ellen Rose for coming down from Ogdensburg, and of course Lisa Parsons, who's been a friend of mine for more than I care to admit, and Steve Todd, who is District Superintendent of BOCES, for coming over and talking about education and opening a dialogue which may go further, and I'm kind of hopeful that it will, that we will continue to explore ways of improving the educational system within our community. So many thanks to all three of you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And we had a good thing with the water too. That worked out just great. Thank you so much for being a part of our program tonight. Again, thanks to WPBS for allowing us to be in front of you this evening. We hope you enjoyed that, and if there are ever questions or anything that you want to talk about these programs, feel free to share that with staff. They are very interested in knowing what you are thinking. We wish you a very pleasant good night.